My co-authors and I are very grateful to ASAP, the Academic Stand Against Poverty, and also to the Yale University Global Justice Programme for having conferred on our book the 2023 ASAP Book of the Year Award. Globally, approximately 800 million children live below a poverty line of $3.2 a day. 1 billion children experience multiple deprivations in health, nutrition, education, or standards of living. And this extremely worrying situation is not because the families of these children are not caring for them. It is primarily a failure of society. In this book, we seek to achieve 3 objectives. First, we seek to improve our understanding of the various mechanisms that perpetuate poverty from one generation to the next. That is, put differently, the mechanisms that deprive children born in poverty of their ability to overcome the circumstances of their birth in their adult lives. Second, we seek to put will above fate, to pit hope against complacency. The vicious cycles that perpetuate poverty can be broken. The obstacles are neither financial nor lack of knowledge. And finally, our third objective is to identify some examples of anti-poverty strategies that have worked, and with humility, to offer some guidance to policymakers, or at least to contribute to some form of collective learning. So we provide a set of options, a menu from which to choose, together with some general recommendations such as the importance of grounding the anti-poverty strategy in human rights. These options will then have to be implemented differently, of course, depending on local context and circumstances. We very much hope that this ASAP Prize will contribute to spreading the message that breaking the vicious cycles perpetuating disadvantage is both urgent and feasible. Let us now take you through some of the questions that we address in our book. Children who grow up in poverty not only have less chance of reaching their full potential, they also face a much higher risk of being poor as adults, and thus of raising their own children in poverty. How can we explain this dynamic, these vicious circles? Well, living in poverty means, of course, lacking sufficient income. But not only this. It also means having limited access to essential services, such as healthcare, education, childcare, housing. It also means being more likely to suffer from inadequate nutrition, having weaker employment prospects. And it also means having fewer opportunities for saving, acquiring or inheriting assets, as well as having lower coverage by social protection mechanisms. Poverty-related stress, as well as the erosion of aspirations, self-confidence and hope among people experiencing poverty, also play important roles in perpetuating poverty. What is terrible is that all these factors I have just gone through work in combination. They reinforce one another and create the conditions for systemic forms of exclusion. Let me take one concrete example of this dynamic: housing. Low-income households are more likely to live in disadvantaged neighborhoods because housing is simply unaffordable elsewhere. These areas tend to have fewer green areas where children can play, as well as less and or lower quality public services. And as a result, children living in these areas may have more health problems due to bad housing conditions, poor quality housing, overcrowded households, and also due to bad environments or pollution. These children also have less access to good quality early childhood education and care. They have more risk of being placed in institutions. They will more often be confronted by school segregation and would be more likely to attend lower quality schools. They will have a greater risk of school failure or of dropping out of school, which will reduce their employment opportunities later in adult life when they, in turn, will become parents. And so goes the intergenerational perpetuation of poverty. I could give plenty of other examples illustrating that the factors that may cause, accentuate or perpetuate poverty are present in many domains of life, not just housing, and that they contribute to creating step-by-step the difficulty to escape from poverty once adult. And this dynamic is repeated across generations, often many generations, in fact, as Olivier will explain in a few minutes. It is therefore particularly challenging for people experiencing poverty to change their trajectories. Yet, it is essential to avoid any sense of fate. These impacts of poverty are not inevitable, and they can be reversed. The title of our book claims that the escape from poverty requires breaking the vicious cycles perpetuating disadvantage. And the cover of our book illustrates this title by highlighting that for breaking these vicious cycles, we have to fight against poverty and inequality in their multidimensionality. And for this, we need to tackle, among others, low education, malnutrition, poor childcare, housing deprivation, etc. We were limited by the number of words we could include on the cover.
The evidence in our book clearly shows that poverty and inequality damage all of us, the whole society, and not only children or people suffering from poverty. And there are many reasons for this. Let's focus on two reasons. First, there is a link between inequality and poverty and problems in terms of social cohesion, social participation. And second, there are huge costs of poverty. Let's first focus on the first aspect, the relation between social cohesion and poverty. It's really important that people experiencing poverty know that they have the opportunity to improve their own situation and the situation of their children. Otherwise, sadness, resentment, loss of hope can set in. This provides fertile recruitment ground for those promoting extremist and racist views that threaten people's rights and undermine democracy. There are also various studies which have shown that the higher the level of inequality, the less people tend to perceive themselves as sharing common goals, which tends to hinder civic and political participation of citizens, and again, which encourage populist and extremist voting. An analysis of 24 European countries showed that these results hold true for the entire population, for the entire income distribution, but it's more pronounced among low-income people. In addition, poverty and inequality also generate significant social and economic costs. There are huge costs of inaction, and there are also huge benefits of action. Let's first explain the cost of inaction. As Eric explained a few minutes ago, when a child grows up in poverty, the consequence for a child, but also as an adult later, are numerous in terms of health, school success, educational attainment, but also perspective of employment and productivity in the whole society. This means that there are untapped human potential, wasted talents, and de facto loss of productivity for the society, but also there are various social problems associated with poverty that will require spending public resources for public services and also for social benefits. There is a study published by the OECD in 2022 which estimated the total cost of the labor market and health penalties associated with the socioeconomic disadvantage experienced during childhood. The OECD shows that on average for the 27 European countries, this will cost the equivalent of 3% of the GDP in terms of lost employment, earnings and health. And this overall cost varies substantially between countries. These figures do not take into account of the uncollected taxes and the additional social spending, more unemployment and other social benefits, more health spending, more social services, more police and justice. It is therefore very likely that the 3% of GDP is in fact well below the total cost of the socioeconomic disadvantage experienced during childhood. As I said, there are also huge benefits of action against child poverty. Many cost-benefit analyses show that the return on investment of policy fighting child poverty is very high. Each euro invested in quality intervention in the field of education, nutrition or health could yield between 5 and 7 euros. These economic costs highlight the importance of tackling childhood socioeconomic disadvantage, ensuring that all children start life on an equal footing with full and equal opportunities is of course first and foremost a matter of equity and fairness. But as the study shows, there are also an economic case for investing in changing the odds of disadvantaged children. The potential gains for reducing current losses of economic output and welfare are really substantial.
Inequalities have been growing since the early 1980s, both in OECD countries and in developing countries. And this is becoming a major obstacle in the fight against poverty, for at least two reasons. The first one is that as inequalities increase, people in poverty will be priced out from certain goods or services that are indispensable for a decent standard of living. For example, the price of housing will continue to increase. The level of rents for apartments will continue to increase as long as there are within society much richer people willing to pay high rents or to pay lots of money to buy certain houses. This will result in housing becoming unaffordable for people living on low incomes. Or to take another example, private schools, private universities may be tempted to raise tuition fees as long as there are some households willing to pay a very high price for the acquisition of certain diplomas, making it more difficult for low-income families to afford education for their children. The second reason why inequalities matter so much is because they have an impact on social mobility. There are studies showing that social mobility in OECD countries has been declining in recent years. It takes many generations sometimes to overcome the fact that one has been raised in a low-income households, up to 10 or 11 generations in countries such as Colombia, Brazil, or South Africa, and 6 generations in a country such as France. And inequalities play a role in this, in that the more a country is unequal, the more difficult it will be to overcome this disadvantage. This is known as the Great Gatsby curve, showing an inverse relationship between inequality and social mobility. The name, the Great Gatsby curve, comes from the novel of Francis Scott Fitzgerald, showing the story of a bootlegger in New York who raises to become a millionaire, and the novel has been presented as a movie in 2013 featuring Leonardo DiCaprio. So this is the reason why a specialist of inequalities such as Richard Wilkinson says that if you really want to live the American dream, you better go move to Denmark, because that is where equal opportunities are the most real. Now, it is because inequalities matter so much that we must do more to tackle the rise of inequalities. Of course, we should do this by progressive taxation, by financing with the public purse social protection, education, healthcare, social housing, these public goods that states should provide to their population. But beyond these post-market compensatory redistributive measures, we need to ensure that markets work well for all and provide real equal opportunities. Making the economy more inclusive is the best way to achieve a reduction in inequalities. And finally, we should invest, of course, in early childhood education and care. These pre-market measures have been proven to be the most effective in reducing inequalities, as shown by the economist James Heckman from University of Chicago, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in economics for his work on childhood poverty. James Heckman showed that the earlier the investment was made in the education of the child, the higher the return would be on that investment. In part because knowledge acquisition, learning, is a cumulative process, so that you are much better equipped to seize opportunities of education in later life if during early childhood you have been able to acquire a rich vocabulary and to learn the basics at pre-primary school level. So for all these reasons, we should do much more to combat inequalities, and we should do so not only by focusing on post-market redistribution, but also on market-based measures and on pre-market interventions in early childhood education and care.
Olivier has emphasized the importance of reducing inequality and the policies needed to do so, if we are to end the intergenerational perpetuation of poverty. In the escape from poverty, we also focus on the policies needed to end child poverty, if we are to break the vicious cycle. We draw on the extensive body of evidence that is available from around the world, and build on the experience of successful initiatives in many countries to spell out what works in combating child poverty. The evidence shows that we need to strengthen the social investment state. In particular, we need to develop strong social protection systems, invest in early childhood, promote inclusive education, invest in inclusive health services, invest in decent housing and safe living environments, and invest in access to sport, culture, and leisure activities. In addition, we also document several actions that are necessary to ensure that policies in all these areas are successful. These include, first, developing comprehensive, multidimensional strategies that bring all the different policy areas together so that they reinforce each other. Secondly, promoting integrated delivery of policies and programs at local level. Thirdly, combining universal and targeted policies. Fourthly, counting every child and leaving no one behind. Fifthly, putting children's rights at the heart of strategies. Sixthly, improving research and data collection, promoting child mainstreaming, and enhancing monitoring and reporting and setting targets. And finally, ensuring adequate participation in the policy process of children and families experiencing poverty. So, we know what needs to be done in developing effective approaches to combating the intergenerational perpetuation of poverty through reducing inequality and tackling child poverty. But how do we make this actually happen? One of the answers we propose is to do much more to raise public and political awareness of both the positive benefits for children and society of tackling the perpetuation of poverty and the costs of not doing so. We argue that a combination of moral and utilitarian arguments and evidence is needed to build political will and to counter myths and stereotypes about people in poverty that lead to them being blamed for their poverty and that are too often used as an excuse for inaction. We must find ways of making the evidence highlighted earlier by Catherine much more visible and widely known. In particular, that combating child poverty and reducing inequality is an essential part of building more social cohesion and more resilient societies, and is crucial to realizing children's fundamental rights. It fosters the well-being of children and their families. It strengthens democracies and counters extremism. It makes economies more resilient. It is also cost-effective, and it is good for social and environmental sustainability. Having raised awareness, the next challenge is to turn this into clear national commitments to end child poverty, reduce inequalities, and thus combat the intergenerational perpetuation of poverty. Quantitative targets and timescales for reaching these objectives should be set by each country, as the European Union has done. The setting of targets requires measuring progress on achieving them. This further raises public and political awareness and improves accountability and increases the political costs of inaction. This also fosters debate on policy and programmatic solutions, and thereby increases pressure to gradually improve policies that fail to deliver results. In conclusion, we know what needs to be done to break the vicious cycles. perpetuating poverty. We know that all our lives will be better if it is done. We know that doing so is an essential element in building a sustainable and inclusive future for humanity. So let us all do more to mobilize public and political support to tackle the intergenerational perpetuation of poverty. As Eric indicated at the beginning, we very much hope that the escape from poverty can contribute to achieving this. Thank you.